You're listening to Bad Dog Agility, bringing you training tips, interviews, and news about the great sport of dog agility.
I'm Jennifer.
And I'm Sarah, and this is episode 221. Today's podcast is brought to you by 1TDC. Dog agility can be hard on your dog's body. Help keep their joints and muscles healthy with 1TDC. 1-tetradecanol complex is a clinically studied blend of unique fatty acid oils that can support your dog's joint health. 1TDC provides healthy inflammatory response from head to tail. All of our listeners will automatically qualify for a great 1TDC special offer by purchasing online at bda1tdc.com. That's BDA, the number 1TDC.com. Today's podcast is also brought to you by hititboard.com. Hititboard.com has the innovative training tools you need for agility. Having problems with the dog walker A-frame? The Hititboard can fix that. Your dog doesn't like tugging? They'll love the Tug It. Can't move your A-frame around by yourself? The Move It can. Go to hititboard.com and use discount code BDA10 to get 10% off your order. That's hititboard.com. Today's podcast is going to be all about what you can do as a trainer and handler when you have a dog that tends to get shut down or distracted in training or trialing. Here at Bad Dog Agility, we have a mailing list, and when you join that mailing list in your welcome email, one of the things that we ask you is to reply to the email and let us know what is the one thing holding you back from agility. And I love asking this question because I get a little peek into what is going on with people in agility today and what we can help them with at Bad Dog Agility. And we're able to direct them a lot of times to podcasts that we already have, since we have over 200 episodes. But one answer that I kept getting over and over was that my dog gets shut down or distracted, either in training or trialing. And I realized that I was giving kind of the same variation on an answer to this question over and over. And I thought it would make a great podcast for me and Jennifer to address, because especially in this email, we're getting not very much information about the specific dog, right? We're just getting, in the absence of other information, in the absence of seeing video or working directly with this person, we realized that there were some pieces of advice that we would give as a starting point for anybody that had problems with dogs shutting down or being distracted in these environments. So, Jennifer, let's talk about our kind of generic answer to this generic question. And I think that the first suggestion that I'm going to give people is to look at the length of their sessions. So to shorten their sessions, make sure that you're getting good work, keeping the dog's focus. I mean, one of the easiest ways to lose a dog's focus is to overwork them.
Yeah, I think this is huge. And I think this is super important and worth thinking about, even if you have a dog that's not shutting down just yet, not getting distracted just yet, but to be proactive and not get to that point. So shortening the sessions is huge. I think we are traditionally around the country kind of conditioned to a 1 hour class, right? We drive to a class, do a 1 hour class, do a 1 hour private lesson. And that's sometimes what we think of as the standard. But in reality, that is way too long. That's just what we kind of find as a compromise for travel time, for location availability. And that I think is not the perfect scenario for any dog, regardless of age, regardless of current state of distraction or shutting down. Short sessions. I know we've talked about on a recent podcast the value of filming. And you actually mentioned, Sarah, that one of the great things about filming a session is at the end, you can see how long you trained, right? At the end, it pops up how long your video was. And it can be very good, very eye-opening for how long maybe you trained and didn't feel like it, but very good to keep yourself accountable for these really short sessions. So I always tell people multiple short sessions is going to be better than and outweigh that one long session throughout a day or a week.
Exactly. And actually, I think all of this advice is great advice for all dogs, but it is must follow advice for dogs that get shut down and distracted. So related to shortening the sessions, we actually want to shorten the sessions and increase the rewards. And if you think about the math of rate of reinforcement, if you shorten the session and increase the rewards, you're going to dramatically increase the rate of reinforcement. So I think that without even watching a person, I can usually say you aren't rewarding your dog enough. Like, I think across the board, people usually under reward their dogs, especially once they get to a certain level of proficiency where they feel like the dog knows what it's doing. Then that rate of reinforcement tends to drop off. But if you have a dog that's distracted or shutting down, this is a great way to keep them engaged in terms of distractibility, or to keep them motivated to work with you in terms of shutting down.
And I think along the same lines, and I find myself saying the same thing in these emails that we get through the mailing list, is make sure that what you are using as a reinforcement is truly very reinforcing for the dog. I know that sounds obvious, but again, we are traditionally conditioned to these standard reinforcements. Go into the pet store, buy a bag of dog treats, or, a standard toy. But what you really got to look at is for that dog, not your last dog, not your neighbor's dog, but what does that dog really, really find reinforcing? Maybe it is a less traditional treat. It's not a prepackaged treat, but it's something that maybe is easier, a hot dog or roast beef. But even in terms of toys, like I know one of the things that my puppy loves right now is empty plastic water bottles.
Oh, yeah.
Loves those. So, I think not only do we need to increase the quantity of the rewarding, but also the value of it in some cases as well, making sure that what you have is something that the dog really, really finds valuable. And all too often when I start digging a little deeper and asking these people, they're maybe not using the best reinforcement for that dog, not something that dog really, really, really goes nuts over and loves, but, using what worked for the last dog. So I think increasing rewards is not only quantity, but also quality as well. Absolutely.
And the next piece of advice that we have is high intensity transitions. We have an older podcast all about transitions, and I will add that to the show notes because it'll go a lot more in depth. But I think transitions are often where people are losing their dog. So they might go out on a class and they might do a sequence, and then after the sequence is over, there's a disconnect moment between them and their dog. Sometimes sometimes the dog instigates it, right? You throw the toy, the dog runs and gets the toys and then takes a lap. But sometimes, the dog starts to come back, but the handler has turned away or is looking at the course or is asking somebody, how did that look? Or they're talking to the instructor. And so a lot of times that disconnect is instigated by the handler. And I think if we really pay attention to the transitions, we want to keep them as short as possible. We want to keep them intense. So I see a lot of people, even if they are not in a class environment, there's not somebody else to talk about. They finish a sequence and then they just very slowly and leisurely walk back to the starting point of the sequence. And I think that people don't realize how much of a disconnect that is with the dog. And for some dogs, how punishing that can be for the dog. So, in our mind, we know what the sequence is. We know when we're working and we know when we're not working, right? So we finish the sequence and then people are, they're just making their way back to the start. They're thinking, well, I'm just going to set up for the next sequence. But the dog doesn't know when it started and when it ended. And all they know is that we were doing something together and now we're not doing something together and you're kind of ignoring me. So, you can use, that's why tugging is so great, because you can literally be rewarding your dog during the entire transition. They can be, on the end of a toy, tugging as you walk back. That's really an ideal situation. But if you don't have a dog that likes to tug, you can treat back. You can do several tricks on the way back. You could have your dog do a couple of spins, treat, spin, treat, all while you're working your way back. But just pay attention to that transition and what you're doing there.
Yeah, we've actually just started in our most recent round of classes with some of our puppy classes and younger dog classes, started to work on getting the dogs more familiar with some mat training or allowing some of them to do some crate work. And basically, one of the big reasons that we're doing this is to try to force the handlers that when the dog is not on the mat or when the dog is not on the crate, that they are to be completely engaged with the dog. And as instructors, we're trying to condition ourselves not to give feedback, not to distract the handler from working unless the dog is in the crate or on the mat. So I know that over time, that example that you mentioned about at the end of the sequence, the handler wants to immediately turn and look to the instructor. And I have conditioned myself, certain people have conditioned me rather, that as soon as they get done, before I even say anything, I have to say, reward your dog. Because they immediately want to finish the last jump, turn their back on their dog, look at me and say, okay, what was good? What was bad? And I'm sitting there going, your dog, your dog, your dog. Pay attention to your dog, reward your dog. So now we're trying to adapt a little bit better about keeping that connection and not having that lack of transition by saying, we're not going to talk to you. We're not going to give feedback to you until you finish your sequence. You reward your dog, you tug, you do your tricks, you get over to your mat. When the dog is on the mat, now as an instructor, I'm going to engage with you and I'm going to talk with you and I'm going to give you feedback in order to keep these transitions much smoother, to keep that intensity and to keep that connection. I think all of those examples that you mentioned, I see all the time. And even sometimes people might, okay, the dog finishes the last jump, they throw their toy, but they throw their toy very half-heartedly so that they can say, oh, okay, go occupy your time with that toy while I talk to the instructor. And I think that's what's really important to understand about that high intensity. They know when you're half-heartedly doing that. I know when, as an instructor, when you're doing that, I want, 100% on the dog in that session. And then you keep them engaged from one skill to the next. In a puppy situation, you're doing less and now you're going to work downs. You're keeping that transition. Or if we're talking older dogs, we're talking sequencing, we're talking handling, you're making those transitions smoother, possibly looking at something like a mat or a crate or keeping them tugging while you have to take their attention, while you have to take your attention off of them and onto something else.
I love that perspective as an instructor. So it's really awesome to hear that y'all are taking such steps to help address that with your students. So these first three things that we talked about, shortening your sessions, increasing your rewards, high intensity transitions, these are most applicable to your practice field, to your class environment. But you can take some of these ideas and incorporate it into your trialing. So I think especially the transitions, keeping that idea of keeping your focus on your dog, not disconnecting from them. When you're getting ready to go into the ring and there's a couple of dogs ahead, that's a spot where people sometimes stop paying attention to their dog. You can even increase the rewards by doing things like tricks that are rewarded as you're waiting in line. So all of these things are a way to bring those ideas into the trial environment. And all of these kind of feed into something that we've talked about before, which is a crate to crate routine. So this, I think, is something that applies most to trial environments, although you can also take the crate to crate idea into your practice as well. But the idea is just to have a routine that you go to that's predictable for your dog from the time you take them out of the crate through the run or the practice all the way back into the crate afterwards. So in a trial environment, this would include your warm-up. This would include your cool down. But the idea is that you want your dog to have that predictable routine because it gets them in the right headspace. They know what's coming. It adds some predictability to an environment that is not very predictable, that might be a little bit more stressful for your dog. So they know that when you get them out and you start warming them up, then you're going to do the warm-up jump, then you're going to do some tricks, they're going to get some treats, and it's something that they can actually look forward to, especially if you incorporate these other things like increasing the rewards. They're like, now it's my turn. I love my turn. I get to do all this stuff. And even if the run itself has a little bit of stress involved, when I'm done, I'm going to get pats, I'm going to get praise, I'm going to get treats, I'm going to get tug, I'm going to get a cool down with my mom, and then I'm going to go back to my crate and relax. So I think that crate to crate routine is, again, something that all dogs should have, but it is most important for dogs that shut down or get distracted, to give them that predictability, but also to force the handler to build in the increased rewards, the increased connection with the dog.
So one thing that I'm trying with my puppy, and this is my first dog that I'm trying this with. She's only 8.5 months. We'll have to see how it goes. But I think it could be really useful for dogs that tend to get distracted, dogs that kind of sniff, the dogs that want to check things out. And that is, I'm trying to use two different kind of leashing devices and harnessing devices for when we're working and when we aren't. So if I put her on a leash, so I snap a leash onto her collar, or I put a martingale over her collar, that signifies that we're working. So I'm going to have rewards. I'm going to be asking for behaviors. I'm going to be reinforcing attention. And we're very much working. But we do a lot of walks. We do a lot of decompression walks. We do a lot of going out. You're at a show for all day. You're not going to only have them out of the crate when they're working. You might go out and wander around on a nice day. For those situations, I switch her over and put her on her harness. So when I put her on her harness and I clip her leash to her harness, it's a little bit more of like, it's acceptable to go sniff. You can check things out. You can sniff around. It's not to say that I'm not going to call her name and ask her to give me attention and reinforce her. But I do think it's going to help her, or my hope is that it helps her a little bit understand when we're on and when we're off. And I guess maybe this would even fall into the category of, transitions. But I think of it as part of her crate to crate routine. Because when I do my kind of cool down, so when I get her out of the car, we put her on her leash, it's on her neck, on her collar, we're working. At the end of the session, I do try to always cool my dogs down, even as a puppy when we're done. If we've been doing stuff with a lot of running, I'll take her on a little walk. At the end of the session, I flip her on the harness, switch her on that, and then now we go on a small cool down. And as we're cooling down, she can just be walking around, sniffing, checking things out before we go back to the crate. So that might be a tool for some dogs who are struggling a little bit with the distractions of knowing when they're working, but when it is acceptable to check things out. So that might be something to try playing around with as part of that crate to crate routine.
I think that's a fantastic point and a great idea. And it has the added benefit. In agility, we like to do a lot of restrained type work with our dogs. And so it's really great to have a harness as part of your training, because the dog can learn that harness is acceptable to pull on and collars are not acceptable to pull on. So if you want a dog that will not pull whenever you put their collar on and choke themselves, but you want to have the benefit of doing some restraint type work, then harnesses are a great tool. One other piece of advice that I have for trialing, and again, we have an entire podcast on this, so I'm just going to touch on it briefly and then refer you to the podcast, is to look for common disconnect spots on course. So there are predictable spots where dogs are more likely to become disconnected from their owners. And in short, it's going to be turns, crosses, and tunnels. And if you pay extra special attention in those spots at reconnecting with your dog, you can prevent some of those disconnect spots. So that's definitely something that I would look at in the trial and the practice situation. And then the final thing that I always want to point out is that you need to look at weaknesses in your training. So the big example that I like to give is, let's say that your dog misses the weave pulls and then starts sniffing or running around or having the zoomies or disconnects from you. This is not a distraction or shutdown problem. This is a weave problem. And so you need to address the weaves and not really worry about the disconnect. It's just a byproduct. It's a symptom. It's not the thing that you need to be looking at. And so I think a lot of shutting down and disconnection really comes from not quite having the skills that you need for the level that you're competing at, or having them just kind of tenuously taught so that the dog kind of barely knows it, or they've just learned it, and then it kind of falls apart in the trial environment. And so be really honest about your skills. Look at the places where your dog is shutting down, and if it's a common obstacle, or if you know that you have weaknesses in your training, address those, and you will likely see a lot of that shutdown behavior go away.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with this. And I think, the statement you said about be honest with yourself is really important, because I think people like to say it's a distraction issue. There was fuzz on the ground, there was treats, and those things may be the case. But if your dog is only noticing them when you get to the weave poles, or only running off to sniff that fuzz when you get to the weave poles, there's probably more to it than just the distraction or the shutting down, that it is in fact a byproduct of a weaker skill.
Yeah. And when in kind of closing this podcast, let's take a look at all of the advice that we gave. Short sessions, increased rewards, high intensity transitions, create to great routine, calm and disconnect spots, and address weaknesses in training. Nowhere in there did we explicitly address being distracted or shutting down. And I think that that's the key here, is that there's so much more that we can work on that will result in a dog that is more connected and more confident than and it's actionable. It's stuff that you can go out and you can do right now. Sometimes the idea of a dog that's just generally distracted or shuts down, or, you can't get that performance and trial that you get at home, it can feel very overwhelming. You don't really know where to start, and you don't really know why it's happening, and you don't really know what to do. But here, I think if you just go out and you focus on these 6 things, you are highly, highly likely to see a huge improvement in your dog's behavior.
Yeah, these are easy things, guys. These are little simple things that can go a long way to make a huge difference.
All right, and that's it for today's podcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors, 1TDC.com, hititboard.com, and NTI Global. Spring into summer sale. Start off your training season with some brand new heavy-duty agility items from NTI Global. Their sale starts this month. Visit shop.ntiglobal.com for the widest selection of dog agility tunnels for both competition and backyard training. Known for free shipping, more options, high-quality products, and low prices, NTI Global has got you covered. They also offer tamer and anchor weight bags along with a full line of accessories and agility storage solutions. Need your agility gear in a hurry? Don't forget to check the in-stock selection. Visit shop.ntiglobal.com and use promo code AGILITY2019 SPRING INTO for 5% savings off today. Promo code good through May 31st, 2019. Happy training.